Our featured guest tonight has had an incredible career in the film industry, and her story involves so many colorful characters and some of the most well-known actors of our time. She studied acting under the great Stella Adler and has herself been an in-demand acting coach for some of Hollywood's best and brightest. She has now turned her attention to more directorial work with her most recent film, Miranda's Victim, starring Abigail Breslin, Donald Sutherland, and Luke Wilson, receiving rave reviews from audiences, critics, and across the festival circuit. Here to chat about it all is none other than the great Michelle Danner. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Michelle, it seems like there's just so much to talk about with your life in show business, but I'd like to start at the beginning. If I'm not mistaken, you are truly a child of many cultures. What was life like for you growing up?
Well, I have felt that I had a very artistic childhood. My father opened the very first offices of the William Morris Agency, which is now William Morris Endeavor, in the 60s in Paris. And I was a little girl and I would go with him to work. I was very, very close to my dad. And I would play under his desk and play in his office while all these big stars would come in and talk about their careers, talk about their dreams. And I was very early on drawn to literature. So I would read quite a lot. As a matter of fact, in my closet, I created a whole reading, place. And I would go to museums and I would go to the theater and I would go to see films. And I was just passionate at a very early age about storytelling, great stories. And my childhood provided me that, a very eclectic array of art all around me.
How big was the William Morris Agency at the time your father took that job in Paris? Was it kind of at the very beginning, or was it already really established?
Beginning. It was off the Champs-Élysées. I remember, white marble and fireplaces. And, it was quite, they represented all the big stars at the time. And he opened those very first offices. And then he went on, he stayed with them for quite a while. And then he went on and opened, his own office. And he spearheaded many other stars, Julio Iglesias, and, the Harlem Globetrotters and all the boxing, Muhammad Ali, Fraser Foreman. So he also was very eclectic in what he picked to promote.
Do you remember anything about the move? I mean, was the family excited about going to Paris? Were you excited?
Oh, well, yes, except, the little French kids were brutal and they tortured me. They called me La Petite Américaine, the little American, and they put frogs in my back and pull my hair. But I found my way in. I started to write plays and put together evenings of poetry and dance. And I adapted this famous novel, The Queen's Necklace, Alexandre Dumas, which has been made into movies and TV shows. And I adapted that for the school and cast all the kids. And teachers loved me. And also I made them crazy because I revolutionized everything. But I was always putting something together, an event together. So I went from being, the little American girl that they would bully and torture to like the most popular girl in school because they all wanted me to cast them.
What was life like growing up around your dad? And I mean, specifically around show business. You were talking about some of the people your dad was working with back then. I mean, did anyone ever come around the house for dinner whom you look back on years later and went, wow, I had no idea just how unique or how special that was?
Oh, yes. We had a lot of very big celebrities come to dinner. There was Edith Piaf. Marlene Dietrich didn't come. Maurice Chevalier, a lot of like iconic people, Charles Aznavour, a lot of actors. And, they would go to the kitchen and gather whatever they could and make a big bowl of rice with whatever they could find in the refrigerator and in the kitchen. And there was a piano and they would play songs and laugh and tell stories. And so I was privy to those evenings, to those afternoons. It was actually sometimes entire days. So my dad was a wonderful, wonderful dad, as was my mom. They're both passed away, my mom very recently. I remember one morning when my dad was in Tokyo and he flew in especially to take me to school. So I see this big black car pulling in the driveway. We lived in this French castle. And he just literally came to take me for my first day of school think it was the 8th grade, and then he went right back on the plane to go close a deal in Tokyo. So this is the kind of stuff, even if, the fact that he traveled a lot when I was a child, but this is the memorable things that you remember. Every time he called, he remembered what test I had to take, what class I was, taking. My mom was more a mom at home, but yeah, it was my parents. What was wonderful about the upbringing that they gave me is that they didn't impose anything on me. They let me find my way. And I had a certain freedom. On one hand, maybe a child longs for a little bit more structure. But on the other hand, that freedom, I think, made me who I am today. And I found myself, they weren't necessarily the parents that took me to museums, although they took me to the Palais of Versailles many Sundays. Every time somebody would come to visit, we'd take them to the Palais de Versailles. But they, I went on my own. I had a freedom to go on my own and explore. And they didn't say no to me in the things that I wanted. So I had this very, free childhood.
And I presume you probably got to watch your dad go through some of the highs and lows of the industry. I know you've talked before about the image of him sitting on the edge of his bed, drinking a scotch, staring into space. I mean, it's kind of a cinematic image, actually. Was it kind of a foregone conclusion in your home that most of the kids would be artistic or work somehow in the business? Or did your parents ever voice a desire for you to do something different? Or, I mean, was that freedom, like you talked about earlier, to do whatever you wanted? Were you steered in a direction, steered away from something?
No, that it was, in a way, maybe I could have been guided more because I was very free to find my way, and find my way I did. Yes, there were a lot of ups and lows. I mean, I remember a limo, we were flying to Rome first class, a limo taking us to this beautiful vacation spot in Italy called Viareggio, where we had, waiters serve us lunch on the beach with white gloves, and they would bring the telephone because there were no cell phones at the time. They would bring the telephone to my dad on the beach. And then I remember, in New Jersey, there was a time where the electric bill wasn't paid. And my dad bounced a check at the market. So they were the highs and the lows for sure. But we had many highs. And yes, there were moments where my dad struggled. And he, yes, it's an image where he sat at the edge of the bed with a little scotch. He wasn't, a drinker, but, those were the tough moments. You knew when he sat there with the glass of scotch, he was having a hard time. And so there were big highs and big lows.
Did you get to watch lots of French cinema growing up? I mean, did you have any favorite movies or actors or actresses from that time?
Very much so. Jean-Paul Belmondo and Alain Delon and Jean Gabin and Simone Signoret and Isabella Gianni, and the list goes on and on and on. Extraordinary actors and performers. And I would go to the movies all the time, and I would watch television all the time. I love French cinema. I love Italian cinema. I mean, there's so many great things to see. The power of story is something that always, found a place in my heart.
Was there maybe a specific film or play that kind of sealed the deal for you and made you go, this is what I want to do. I want to work in show business?
Well, I loved Antigone by Jean Anouilh. Antigone's story, that Greek tragedy, was very dominant, and Electra. So yeah, I worked a lot on that and the modern adaptation of that. And in terms of movies, I think I loved Gone with the Wind. That was a big movie that I loved. Yeah, that really, I remember going to see it to the movies, or Young Frankenstein. I loved that when I was a teenager. I've always had very eclectic tastes. You can't pin a taste because I always like to watch everything.
And now you really can watch with streaming and everything, there's just so many things you can see of every genre at any moment at just a click, Yeah,
it's great. It's a huge library, a vast library of very diverse storytelling. And it makes the days, quite enjoyable, something to look forward to. I always check in with my kids and go, what are we watching tonight?
It's a great way at the end of the day, especially if you've had a day where you're dealing with, frankly, any aggravation whatsoever, for you to unwind and and just decompress. You know what I mean? And
Absolutely.
it's a fantastic art form for that.